Yo, 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 we are back. We are back. I felt like I just saw everybody. It was just live a little while ago talking Tennessee Clemson, but now I'm back with some special guests, and we're going to be talking college football playoffs. You know what it is. We got TCU, Michigan. We got Ohio State, and Georgia, of course, from the SEC. But first, I gotta, of course, introduce my supporting cast, the ones that are carrying me. First time guest on SEC Focus podcast, Mr. Mike Hughes.
What's
What up,
up, R
Mike?
dog?
It's all good, baby. Then, of course, we have the queen of the SEC Focus Facebook page, Miss Nikki Mays.
Hello.
Look at that. So classy with her hellos. And then last but and least, actually, Chris, my man, Mouth of the South, Chris Keenhold. What's up, Chris?
Just chilling, enjoying my time off until Tuesday morning when I have to go back to the grind.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to start this off talking about TCU and Michigan, and I'm going to go straight to you, Nikki, because I told you earlier, I've really been diving into the numbers. I've watched TCU play this year. I've watched Michigan play this year, but then I really started taking a deeper dive and looking into it. And I need you to convince me, how does TCU pull off this upset? Because if you're looking at comparing the two teams on paper, it looks like a dominant to Michigan side. So tell us all, how does
Well, that's
TCU pull
how
this
it's
off?
looked all season
Yeah, true.
against any team that they went up against and was told there's no way they were going to win. They find a way. And honestly, Max carries this team on his back when it comes to the heart, and we're not stopping until there's nothing left on the clock. So, and I feel like Coach G is going to have the defense ready for Michigan. Michigan passing wise isn't the greatest. They're
True.
more of a run team, and I feel like he got them ready for Texas because at the time Texas was more running than passing. Quinn just coming back, so they had no issue there. So I don't think they're gonna have an issue against that.
So, Mike, I'm gonna go to you real quick. I'm breaking down some numbers. You know, you and me, we're statistic guys, right? So you look at TCU, they're 56th. They're talking about defense now, points per game
Mm.
against. They're 73rd in yards per game against. And then you flip that table over, and what really concerns me about this matchup is that Michigan is elite at one thing, and they're really elite at it. They are 243 yards a game on the ground. Now that's 15th, 14th, 15th in the country, depending on which one you look at it. And TCU on the flip side, they're 64th in the country in rush defense. They allow 150 yards a game. So I ask you, if you're looking at all that, we know the Cinderella story that TCU's had on. How do they flip the script for one game and slow the Michigan rushing attack down?
Well, I think, you look at it for what it is, and Harbaugh is definitely gawking at those numbers for a defense playing against them. He is. I give all my respect, not just because he's a former Bears quarterback, but I give him all the respect in the world because I do believe he is a coach among men. I mean, he trains young men to be the best versions of themselves, and I do give him all the credit for that. But to Nikki's credit, I mean, this kid Max, he looks about 140 pounds soaking wet. He looks like just your typical guy you'll see at the YMCA. But this kid's meals on wheels. This kid goes. This kid can run. This kid can throw. This kid can read a defense. And one of the biggest key factors, and I don't like talking about last year because it's not relevant, but Aiden Hutchinson not being a part of that pass rush, I feel like is such a huge factor to that. Their defense definitely did diminish. It's still pretty solid, but it's definitely something to where you're not seeing 10 out of 10 all-star level defenders going against Max. So I see that with an already good rush game from TCU. Obviously, they can throw the ball if they want to. They're not opposed to it. So I definitely do think, just continuing to do the things you do is the biggest key part of that. I feel like when you start switching things up and you try to be the smartest guy in the room, that's when everything falls apart. So keep being you, make them make the adjustments. And obviously they're going to have adjustments for your adjustments, but that's what makes the game a game is, it can't just be X's and O's. Somebody has to be able to, pick apart that defense. So I think that's really what Max needs to do is just be him. I've never really seen him in a moment like this, in a situation like this where, not only was the whole season on your back, but now it's one of the biggest games of the year. So I don't know what he's going to look like in this. But Jeezy, we know how Harbaugh looks in these moments. So I think he's got a fair fight.
Yeah, and I think to your point, when you're talking about Max Duggan, one thing that Michigan has not seen, that all year long they did not face a prolific passer of the football like Max Duggan is. So they have obviously faced CJ Stroud. That turned out pretty well. He got his numbers, but Max Duggan has attempted more passes of 20 yards or more downfield than anybody Michigan has faced. So I think that's something that Michigan hasn't had to contend with. But if you look at their defense, Chris, going to you, Michigan's defense is third in the country in yards per game against. They're fifth in points per game against in the country. So people will look at the schedule and say, look who they played. But I think that that's not doing the Big Ten justice. And I think obviously we're an SEC podcast, but I mean, they play a good brand of football there, and they completely shut Ohio State down in the second half of that game and dominated that game on the line. So I ask you the same question. How does TCU kind of flip the script? And it's not like they're outnumbered. I don't think they're going into this David and Goliath. They're a 7.5-point underdog, but they've been that all year, as Nikki said. So what are the keys for you on how you think TCU just, gets this done?
For me, I got a couple things. You have to use your speed to get playmakers the ball in space. They're smaller, faster than Michigan is. If you get behind, don't quit. You've been there before. You've been there all year long. You've gotten behind just about every single game, and you've come back. You're battle tested. Put points on the board and make it a shootout. I don't think Michigan can outscore you if it gets into a shootout because they rely so much on their running game. It's going to become a problem for them. And the last thing, draw some power from the Hypnotoad.
My thing is, though, where would we, okay, so every team that played TCU this year came out saying they're not supposed to be where they're at. We're going to take them out. So how much of that right now is what Michigan's doing? Looking ahead, we already beat them. We know this Michigan team. We know how they react under pressure. Yeah, they're doing awesome this year, but there's that. Look at them in the conference championship. They were looking ahead, and it wasn't pretty. So at this point, does Michigan say, okay, we can't look ahead? Or do they say, up next is Ohio State or Georgia? Because they want that rematch. I know they want the rematch.
Yeah, no, I agree. Chris, you talked about the scoring, making it be a shootout. To your point there, these teams, TCU is sixth in the country in scoring offense, 40.3 a game. Michigan is seventh at 40.1 a game. One of the things that, for me, the takeaway, and Mike brought this up, was talking about the defense. Aiden Hutchinson last year is getting to the quarterback, but on top, what's more important to me is protecting the quarterback. Michigan's pretty elite at doing that. They've only allowed 13 sacks this year. That's not great. That's not elite numbers, but it's pretty good. TCU has allowed 23. Now, looking at the stats alone, you could say that that's too many sacks allowed. I think that that's just kind of what TCU does. Like you said, they get behind sometimes and they have to come back. So that gets Max out into space, and sometimes he's holding on to the ball. So I don't put a lot of emphasis on that. I think both offensive lines are going to do well. And I think that this isn't like some kind of Nostradamus prediction here. I think the team that is able to protect the quarterback and is able to get him more time in the pocket, that's the team that's going to win. For me, another thing that I think is that Michigan does well is when they get into the red zone, they score. And Chris, like you talked about, it's because they rely on their rushing game. They're fifth in the country. They score on 93.7% of the time they get into the red zone, they score. TCU, they have scored on 81.8% of the time. So I think it's when you get there, if you're TCU, you have to capitalize. And also if you're TCU, you cannot settle for field goals. Michigan is going to try ball control. They're going to try to keep the ball away from you. They're going to try to get the ball out of Duggan's hands. Obviously, we understand that if he has time, it doesn't matter how much he's down, that guy gives you a fighting chance. So, for me, I think that those are the kind of the keys to the game. And it would be easy, of course, to just throw out, the X factors are going to be, the quarterbacks. But I think more than that, to me, is the offensive line. Mike, you got anything to say about that?
I'm still wrapping my mind around the word Nostradamus, Randy Jowers. I've never heard you say something like that in my life, but
he's trying to sound smart like the panel last night.
crazy.
Yeah,
It's
man.
insane. It's black. He never comes on my shows talking that crazy.
Well, that's
But
because we're talking about the Cubs. I mean, you know.
yeah, 100. It's not in our vocab. It's not in our vocab. If the word underpay isn't said, it's not said. But no, I think you're right. I mean, offensive lines, the trenches. I mean, it's such a huge part of the game that just gets overlooked every single year. Everybody looks at Bryce. Everyone looks at Bryce or CJ or someone like that, and they think, oh, that's going to be the X factor to this game. But nobody talks about Trevor Lawrence's offensive line. Nobody talks about the line Justin Fields had for years or the line other guys have had before them. It's such a huge part to the game. And I know we're going to talk about Georgia in a little bit, but there is a quarterback in this league that is a national champion that I don't believe is a good quarterback, but he has a great offensive line, and it speaks volumes to what they've been able to do. And it makes guys look a lot better than what they really are. So I think that's going to be a huge part of the game. Like you said, Hutch not being there, which isn't an excuse. It's, it happens every single year. Guys reload on teams. But it definitely is going to be a felt presence that they've been slowly trying to figure out that identity. It is what it is. I hate always saying that because every 4 years, there's a new kid that comes in, or every other year, there's a new kid that comes, forget about the last one. But in Hutchinson's presence last year was so huge for the identity of that defense. So for them, looking at a dual threat like Max, and that's why, Nikki hit it on the head, and I'm sure she can go in way further than I can about how talented Max is. But that's why I brought up his legs, is because, everyone talks about this kid being able to throw the ball. But Michigan, outside of CJ Stroud, really hasn't seen someone like that this year. And I will say this, Fields is my guy, but Ohio State quarterbacks from a passing perspective really aren't what Max is right now. Max is far above them when it comes to what his consistencies look like. So I think that's going to be a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, no,
Matt
I agree.
Likes to be sacked. He wants at least one because that's momentum for him. If you watch, as soon as this kid gets sacked in a game, momentum changes. It adds fuel to his fire.
Flow.
He's a psycho.
Like they do it on purpose.
Yeah, he's a psychopath, 100%.
He is.
He feeds on it.
That's probably why I love him.
All right, so before we
tell us how you really feel.
Yeah.
Before we do move into the Ohio State Georgia, we'll go around. Chris, I want to start with you. Give us a final score and how you think this game goes.
I think final score 45-35, and I think TCU pulls the upset.
Ooh, Nikki, get you next.
I'm going TCU 38, and I will give Michigan 32. It's going to be a close game. They're going to fight.
I like it. All right, Mikey, talk to me, baby.
I'm sorry, Nikki. I'm gonna go Michigan 17-13. I think this might be a lower scoring game. I think a lot of people look at the high scoring, but you look at both of these defenses. One, I think Michigan's more talented, but TCU's got that dog in them. They kind of remind me of the Bengals of the 2021 season. They're not big names, but these kids fight and they adjust very well. So I think it's gonna be a dogfight.
I agree with what you're saying, Mike. And I love the TCU story. I love the Max Duggan story. That's the guy that you want your son to model in his game after, his personality. He leads men. I think what Sonny Dykes has done at TCU is phenomenal. I think that as far as the X's and O's, he's on par with Jim Harbaugh. He's on par with the best. I think it's going to come down to Jimmy's and Joe's, and I think Michigan has a few more. I think Michigan wins this game. I'm going to go with 28-17 Michigan. Sorry, Nikki. I want to pick TCU. Okay. I want them to get there. I do. It's just what I see.
I'm used to it all season.
No, I'm not a doubter. I just think
Tennessee has been against TCU all year because they had to lose so that you guys could lose another game and not make the playoffs.
You leave me out of this, Nikki. I've done
South
nothing
Carolina
wrong.
Took care of that for y'all. You don't have to worry about that no more. Oh man, that was a low blow, but I appreciate it. As we kind of roll over into the other match, the 1 versus 4, speaking of Michigan, obviously you have Ohio State going up against Georgia, and it's the 1 versus 4 matchup. And I feel like when people are talking about this game, and I'm watching, the experts break down, it's like they're almost just giving this game to Georgia and New Georgia face. Look, we're an SEC podcast, we're an SEC face page, but I think that if Georgia goes into the game like Nick, you were saying that Michigan might be in for a world of hurt.
Randy, baby, is Is it just me, Nikki?
No, I don't think you paid all of your bill. They're
Oh, I only
cutting
paid
off.
some of it.
Randy, I ain't gonna lie to you, brother. I haven't been able to see you for about 2.5 minutes.
Can you hear
I
me
can
now?
see you, but you're breaking up.
You remember?
Can you hear
I'm
me?
sure you watched it with Eli. You remember that scene in Monsters Inc. where they go into like the snow world and it's just like you can't even see
Yes.
Sully and Mike. That's how it looks right now, brother. I can't see you. I can't hear you. It's crazy.
Ki- Not even now.
Now I see your hand, but it hasn't moved. We like right here, baby.
Oh man, that's
It's me.
awful.
It's me and you versus the world, baby. Don't worry about it.
Me and you versus the world. Look, I can see myself stuck on my own screen.
That's crazy, Randy. I don't know. I didn't want to cut you off, but man, it was getting a little
Oh, he
wild
left.
out there.
I'm not back.
Oh my God, he's blinking. I see it.
I could
There he
only
is.
afford half of the bill this month. Sorry.
It's all right. It happens.
Vanderbilt didn't contribute their part.
Oh, he's gone again. But Nikki, what was that? I heard a little Tennessee slander over there. I didn't deserve
Oh
it.
yeah.
I
I'm a
didn't deserve
Gator.
it.
I'm a diehard Gator.
I'm sorry.
I'm a diehard Gator.
No, I'm sorry. You know, like
No.
that's
No.
truly. But you know, I'm a Bulls fan, so Joakim Noah is my guy.
Yeah.
So I got
Yeah.
love for it.
I love me some
Am
Noah.
I back now?
You're back. You
are.
look
You are.
beautiful.
Listen. Technical difficulties. Somebody said they could see me. I don't know who it was, but listen. We're going Ohio State. We're going Michigan. No. Look, I'm all out of sorts now because of my internet. We're going to be talking Georgia, Ohio State. And if I start, look, Mike, you got to give me like the bat signal if I start fading out again.
Listen, bro, because I texted you and you just ignored me. So I was like, I gotta call him out.
Man. Listen. So listen, like I was saying, I listened to all the experts the last couple days breaking down this Georgia Ohio State. And it's similar to what Nikki was saying about Michigan, that they're looking over TCU. And I feel like that's what a lot of people are doing for Ohio State. But when I really start looking into not only the matchup and the numbers, but when you start going position by position, Ohio State might have the most NFL players on their roster over any team in this thing. So I think for people to just gloss past Ryan Day and Ohio State would be a detriment to them. But I'll start with you, Chris. I want to obviously, I want to know. We'll get to who you think's going to win, but what do you think the keys are for Georgia and Ohio State?
For Georgia, I think you got to dominate the line of scrimmage. You've got the home field advantage. Take care of that. You've been here before. Act like it. You got to control the passing game. Use your tight ends. Remind OSU that they supposedly promised that they were going to win. Use that for a motivational factor if you have to. For Ohio State, you have to attack Georgia's secondary. That's the weak spot on that team. Use the passing game to open up the running game and take advantage of the us against the world mentality. You've got more speed than Georgia does. Get your playmakers the ball in space.
To what you were saying there about attacking the secondary, both of these defenses are elite, right? So Georgia's defense is 9th in the country at yards per game against, 2nd in the country in points per game against. But then on the other side, you also have Ohio State, who's 13th in the country in points per game against, 11th in the country yards per game against. But and then you go on the offensive side of the ball. Ohio State, they are 8th in yards per game. They're 2nd in points per game. Georgia, 9th in yards per game, 10th in points per game. So hearing all those stats, and we know that everybody, the talent is there on both sides. This could be a premier matchup as well as the other one. But Nikki, I'll go to you. What do you think the keys are for each team?
Well, Ohio State's offensive line has to step up in this game. They didn't do the job they were supposed to do against Michigan. They didn't do it against Purdue. They have to step up. Defense-wise, I feel like both of them are on the same page when it comes to that, but they need to protect CJ, and Georgia has to protect Stetson because he's really not that good. He just gets lucky. I mean, seriously, he has the players around him, which is making him look like he is a Heisman candidate when he shouldn't have been. I look at
completely agree with that.
CJ is a Heisman candidate. He can do it with or without having the right players around him. So I say Ohio State has to go after Stetson, break up that O-line quick. And I don't think Ohio State should have a problem.
Yeah. So, Mike, I want to ask you this question, or really point something out to you. I really started looking at this. Ohio State has played 6 defenses that were ranked in the top 25, right? 2 of those defenses are in the top 5. Georgia has played 1 defense that was in the top 25. They've played 2 defenses in the top 35, both of which, one of those was Kentucky, 17th, and none of us think Kentucky's very good, right? The defense is pretty good. They're 17th in the country.
Chloe. I didn't say it.
We saw that Georgia struggled with them. The other team that was 34th in defense was Missouri, and Georgia. It took everything Georgia had and then some to come out of there with a win. So I ask you, is it really that Ohio State is overmatched, or is this just everybody seeing that Georgia, how dominant they were last year, seeing how they've dominated so far, and forgetting how talented Ohio State really is?
I think it's Ohio State at the end of the day, and that's why a lot of people throw that in there. We've had these conversations so many times about teams who can never really finish the job, and that's really one of the narratives that Ohio State's been creating through the last few years. My guy Kevin Lapka, he's from the Ohio State University. I always got to say the, because they get offended if you don't. But I think there's so many different ways you could look at, what they go into every year. I think, you look at Clemson throughout the Deshaun Watson and the Trevor Lawrence days, it was championship or bust. You look at other teams like the Alabamas, it's championship or bust. Like years like this, sure, they lose 2-3 games, but it's still not good enough. With Ohio State, I feel like sometimes they're just happy to be there. And that's really what it is. Like the narrative has changed in their culture throughout the last several years. And I think that's one of the biggest issues right now is, you look at CJ Stroud, you look at the Justin Fields of the world. And statistically, CJ has been able to hold on to the ball very well this year. I believe in the last 2 years, he's had 12 interceptions, both 6 and 6. So he's a phenomenal quarterback, but there are times where I feel like, where there's a Justin Fields, you understand, hey, F it. I'm going to roll out and we're going to run this, or I'm going to sling it down the field. Sometimes with CJ, I feel like he doesn't know which side to lean on. So I do think that is a benefit to Georgia, who is an unstoppable defense. I love Georgia's defense on paper. They are phenomenal. But I do agree with you. You only play who's on your schedule. So I'm not really going to hold them too far into that. As a Volunteers fan, I had to own that up to myself that, sometimes we're not playing the greatest of cats, but then you'll have times where you beat Alabama. So, you never know. You never know how it's going to look. But, Randy, to answer your question, man, I think you hit it on the head. Who has the most NFL-ready guys? I'll tell you what, if JSN, a future Chicago Bear, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, if he was playing in this game, I think it's Ohio State hands down. But the fact that he's not going to be a part of this, it is going to be a huge missed opportunity for this Ohio State offense to really make some noise this year. So I think Georgia has a shot.
Yeah, I think Georgia's got a really good shot. And I did something on this one a little bit different than the last one. And I went down kind of position by position, right? And some of these, obviously, we go quarterback, right? Chris, who, in your opinion, which quarterback has the advantage?
Stroud.
I think
not even a question.
Is that unanimous?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Running back as a committee, is it going to be UGA? And I'm going to preface it by saying this. So Georgia has 207 yards a game rushing. Ohio State 199 yards a game rushing. Ohio State's dealt with some injuries, but as a committee, for me, and I'll ask you guys, I think I give Georgia the nod there just slightly, but I think they're really, really even. Mike, what do you think?
I think the identity for Georgia is a lot simpler. I think there's times with CJ where he is the running game, and I think there's other times where they're running backs by committee. The fact that they have this kid out here in Georgia, and I never say his name because he needs to earn my respect for me to say his name. I don't care if you're a national champion, sir. But watch him be like the next Tom Brady, and you like replay this the next 20 years. Watch it happen. Like it's knowing my luck. But in all seriousness, I really think Georgia has that identity of F it, we're running the ball. Like that's what it is. So I look at that and it's kind of to the CJ point. Like sometimes I don't know what they're really going to do. Sometimes CJ just goes out there and he's CJ, and there's other times where I see them scrambling, trying to figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nikki, in running back, who do you think has the advantage there?
Georgia, because
All
they
right.
have to have it because that's what Bennett works for. Hand that ball off.
Yeah.
There's not there's a, they have to have their run game. Their running backs have to be on point for them to win.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Chris, well, who you give the advantage to there?
I have to give it to Georgia. I can't even name a running back at Ohio State. Just to give you an idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of the running game, like Mike said, comes a little bit from CJ doing his thing and scrambling. But, 200 yards a game, obviously on the ground is nothing to sneeze at. Pretty balanced attack for those guys. So I'll go into, and I'll start with you, Chris, on the wide receiver. I think this is the place that Ohio State has the biggest advantage. Obviously, you have one of the best wide receivers in the country in Marvin Harrison Jr., but he's not all. They have 2 to 3 guys. They're all look, they got a couple of first rounders, maybe second rounders. That to me is where they have the biggest advantage over Georgia. It remains to be seen if they can take advantage. But what are your thoughts on who has the advantage in the wide receiver position?
In the wide receiver room, it's definitely Ohio State. I don't think there's any question about that.
All right. Mikey, what do you think, baby?
The Ohio State University. I'll tell you what, I will take JSN, who's not even playing in this game, before I take anybody. I'll take JSN by himself versus the entire Georgia wide receiver core. I mean, it's just no, stop it.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I don't want to just go like Colin's listening, big Georgia fan. I don't want to look McConkey and what those guys are able to do.
They're
nice.
But
right,
Randy, who's throwing that thing? Who's throwing that cheddar?
I'm with you. I think Ohio State, if I was putting this on a scale, this is where Ohio State has the biggest talent advantage, in my opinion, as wide receiver.
They got 3 guys, I think, to be wide receivers or in the NFL. Like that's but on the other hand, put CJ on that Georgia offense. I think those wide receivers look a lot better. So, it's two hands to every coin.
That's very true. Nikki, what do you think about wide receiver?
Ohio State, but I do believe that Georgia is hit and miss on it. When Bennett's on, his wide receivers are on.
Yeah, that's true.
So you don't know what Bennett's going to show up in this game. So until this game starts, I don't think I could say if it's going to be Georgia or Ohio State, because it just depends on which Bennett is there. Is he relying on his tight ends and his running backs, or is he going to throw that ball?
Now, I will say this, Mike. When my boy Stetson gets that fade and he turns into Stequavius Bennett, that's a different animal. What we have seen from Stetson Bennett, and Colin, Anthony, when you watch this, back me up. This dude turns into a big game performer. Going into the championship game last year, they had just gotten trounced by Alabama. Nobody was giving Georgia a shot. Stequavius showed up with the fade and the lines in the side of his head, Mike, and balled. My boy balled.
No, 100%.
So
I will say that, to his respect, to Bennett's respect, he's a dog. That kid has heart. That kid is the kid I'd want to go to war with. He might not be the most athletically talented. And I did pump this out to all my Chicago group. So if I had to compare him to somebody, the great Jim McMahon, I think when I compare Bennett, I don't think he's the most talented guy in the room. But he's going to speak volumes by what he's willing to do for you, and him understanding the game. It's great. That's why I think if you're talking about a guy like a Brock Purdy, I mean, we're looking at the national championship version of that. So I think that's really what it is. So I think he's great. I give him a lot of shit just because I don't think he's good at a lot of things. Let me rephrase that. I don't think he's great at anything.
Thank you, Mike.
I just don't think he's great at anything, but I think he's good at a lot of things. Like Randy, you and I talked about Hooker about that all season. Hooker has moments where I'm like, yo, you're good at this, this, and that, but what are you great at? And I think that's what I was waiting to kind of see from him. And Bennett, I mean, you got a national championship around your finger, but I mean, hell,
he's a great leader.
Yeah, great leader, but you're not the guy you're not the X factor. And I think that's what it is for me.
But bringing up Purdy, look what he's doing now in San Francisco.
100%.
Here's a guy.
So Stetson randomly
Mr. Irrelevant. But that's the difference. Here's Mr. Relevant because he has a national championship. So they're both the same dude.
For Stetson, like you were saying, watch him turn out to be a Brady. It's like, I don't I don't think I could see that. I've followed Brock Purdy, and I loved watching him play, and I
Right.
loved
He was putting up big numbers in
yeah.
college too.
he could
Nikki,
pass.
Nikki,
he
can
could
I ask you
run.
something? Can I ask you like a
can't
real
see that.
question?
Mhm.
I don't want to take over the show, but did you say you were following Brock Purdy? You
I
watched
do. I
Iowa
stalk
State?
people. I do.
She
I
stalks
did.
them.
I stalk people.
I'm gonna ask both of you guys right now. Are you guys okay?
No.
Because I watched a lot of Iowa games, and all my buddies go to school out there. I went there for a weekend. I was ready to go home. The second it was nothing but corn and 7-point football games on both sides, and I was ready. I was like, "What?" A dude scored a touchdown, and I thought it was New Year's, and the ball just dropped. Everybody.
Now
was
you know
flipping
why
shit.
Chris is a Vanderbilt fan, because he's from Iowa.
Oh,
You got it.
oh, that makes
Iowa terrified
sense.
me.
Now, when Brock Purdy was a junior,
Mhm.
he was projected to be a day 2 or day 3 pick.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%.
But his senior year, he didn't have a good. They didn't have a good year. That's why he dropped so far in the draft.
Right.
But to the point, and bringing it back to Stetson Bennett, one thing we've seen from him this year is he's had the dropsies a lot.
Yeah.
He's put the ball on the carpet multiple times this year. If he
Yes.
starts doing that mess, Georgia's in trouble.
Now, what do you think about, and not to change the conversation, but Randy, you posed this question the other day, because I'm not a first time listener. I'll be watching this a lot. But when you look at him and you look at what he's capable of, let's say Georgia's defense isn't what everybody thinks it is, especially this year. It is a little bit different. You know, a lot of guys returned, but a lot of guys went on their way.
Yeah, lost a lot of talent.
What if that's not the X factor? Because that was what the key was against Alabama last year. The X factor was that defense. If you have to trust Bennett to do what he does, can you?
Oh man,
hit and miss.
Yeah,
Completely hit and miss.
I think what we've seen from Stetson Bennett is that he can rise to the occasion. But if you ask me, if Ohio State is rolling on offense and you have to win a shootout with Stetson and that receiving core, and we're going to get into the tight ends in a second, I think I got to go with Ohio State if it's a shootout. I think how Georgia wins is the defense. Can the secondary, can Keely Ringo, can he make some plays on Marvin Harrison Jr.? Can they disrupt C.J. Stroud in rhythm? Because if they let Stroud get into rhythm, I don't care how good your defense is, he's going to pick you apart, because that's
100%.
what he does.
100%.
But I want to go down a little bit more. Tight ends, I think we can all go past that, because Georgia has two of the best tight ends in the country.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's Brock Bowers is probably the best. And you got another guy who's the second tight end, who's probably better than most people starting tight end.
I will say this, though. Chris probably has some random no-name guy in Iowa right now that's going to be the next George Kittle, because Iowa just produces those dudes. So
that's true.
There's someone in Iowa right now. Don't know who he is.
I hadn't looked yet this year to see if there is anybody, but undoubtedly.
There's got to be. There's got to be.
I should have followed him more.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, Nikki, you brought up something about the offensive line of protecting. Both of these teams they've had bad moments, but they've been pretty elite of protecting. UGA's only allowed 7 sacks on the year, and Ohio State's only allowed 8. Now, to me, the reason that stands out is because you have two quarterbacks who are both pretty good at getting out of trouble and both pretty good at keeping a play alive, but they also hold on to the ball. So, Mike, I'll start with you. When it comes down to the offensive line, who do you trust more to protect the quarterback between Georgia and Ohio State?
I would say, listen, if you had to ask the Pro Football Focus version, I would say Ohio State, just because I think a lot of people don't look into things like, escaping the pocket and actually being a mobile quarterback. So, we can have a Justin Fields in a headlock at the 50-yard line, but he rushes his way all the way for a touchdown. Like that's not on the offensive line. So I'm actually going to give it to Georgia because I do think Georgia has that better identity of protecting a guy who I call him the human statue. That man does not move until he gets that taper fade on the side. Then he's a different man.
That Quavius be rolling now.
He's an animal. He's an animal. But I do think, Georgia has a better identity of what they're doing. It's ground pound football. They have a lot of blockers. They have 2 stud tight ends, like you mentioned, who can block the ball very well. I mean, they're amazing at blocking. So I do think I would give it to Georgia, just because with CJ, he makes his own plays.
one of the things that you kept mentioning, and I think it's a great point, is you kept talking about identity. And that to me is where Kirby Smart has been elite, right? He went to the championship in his second season at Georgia.
Mhm.
What he has created since being hired there in 2016 is nothing short of amazing, right? What the guy's been able to do is create an identity, and it starts in the trenches. And he knew that from being at Georgia first and then being with Nick Saban in Alabama. So, Chris, I'll go to you next. When it comes to the offensive line and winning that battle, protecting the quarterback and getting the running game going, who do you give the edge to?
I have to give it to Georgia, just because we've seen Ohio State struggle at times this year on the offensive line and getting the running game going. Case in point is Northwestern. Their offensive line was not good at all in that game. So I have to give the edge on the O-line to the Bulldogs. I think they're a little bit more talented.
Yeah, I agree. Nikki, what do you think? Offensive line, and like I said, I kept saying protect the quarterback, but this is just as important at running the ball as well.
Well, you have to go with Georgia on that because they have to protect Stetson so he can get the ball off. And they've had to adapt to that now for 2 years. These are big boys. Also, James mentioned it about Stetson has small hands. That's why he has the dropsies. And so that O-line knows that.
Yeah.
So they have to be on their top game, not only watching and protecting him, but also making sure that that ball, if needed, is jumped on. They've done it all season.
So I just want to pose this question when I'm talking about offensive line. They have done a good job. Georgia has only allowed 7 sacks, and they've been able to rush for over 207 yards a game. But I pose this question, and I'll ask it around. When they have faced elite defensive lines like they're going to face, and I'll ask the question next on who's got the better defensive line. Have they faced a defensive line as talented as Ohio State? Mike, I'm going to start with you, actually.
I don't think they've seen an offense of that legitimacy yet. But that's this season. I think you look at last season and them going against Alabama, who had amazing studs coming out of there, who played against amazing other offenses throughout the playoffs. They definitely understand what it takes to actually be there. I think, some of the new guys, that's obviously you can't account for them. But you would imagine that that'll kind of tip off and kind of, I don't like saying this, but kind of become one, like some guys, the new guys, they buy in and they become this system. They feel that energy and they kind of build off of that. So, you get some guys, they're scary and it is what it is. Some guys are scary in this league and it's perfectly fine. But there's other guys who really buy into a system very well. So I do think like this comment from Colin right here, the secondary is going to have to be very good. And I think that's really what it is. And I think understanding that you have so much NFL talent and why I think it's such a key factor that JSN is not playing in this game. Damn near didn't play the whole season if he played any. But I do think, him not being there, you really just got to pick and choose your battles on who you want to cover because there's so many different guys you can go out there on.
Yeah, it's true. And the reason I brought this up on the screen is Colin, our resident UGA fan. What up, Colin? Our secondary will have to play like we did against y'all. Keep an eye on Harrison Jr. like we did with Hyatt. Georgia did a fantastic job of keeping Tennessee's air raid in check. They were able to get to Hendon Hooker. They were able to bottle up Brew McCoy, and they were able to Jalen Hyatt. Tillman didn't play that game, but I think that's a great point. My only worry, Colin, is when I'm watching the game, and me and Colin have talked about this too, is that I also saw the way they played against LSU, and I saw the way that they weren't able to cover those guys and Butte and all those guys. So it worries me that you're giving up the big play because he mentioned it earlier that Ohio State's going to test you there. They're going to get the ball out in one-on-one space, and my concern is can Ringo and company contain the wide receivers long enough where they can create some pressure and all that. So we'll see. And I'm bringing up the defensive line, and I think if you were to ask me, I think I'd give the line to Georgia there too, mainly just because of Jalen Carter. Mike, I'll start with you on that one.
Dog.
Absolute dog.
Hey, what Tatum say? Top 5.
Top 5.
Top 5 what? Top 5.
Just top 5.
He's top 5. No, like Jalen Carter is I don't like saying guys are certain in the NFL. That's a lock. Like he is going to make an NFL difference the second he gets there. He is the Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, the Penei Sewell, I'm gonna say Chase. I'm gonna say Chase Young instead of Aiden because Aiden's had some games where he looks sloppy. But I do think you look at Carter, that changes everything. that changes everything because you're running by committee. And I mean this respectfully because the game of college is so different than the NFL and high school as well. If you run by committee, you don't have a running back. You have several guys who play running back, but unless
Yeah.
you're the Alabamas, unless you're the Ohio States or someone along those lines, it's questionable. It's questionable. So I do think that's something they could use to their advantage. Carter is a dog. And hey, shout out to Carter for actually playing in this game. Does not have to play in this game. Gonna be a top 5 pick. The money is there, but that man wants to win. JSN, take notes, baby.
Shout out for sure. So, Nikki, I'll go to you next on defensive line. Who do you think has the advantage there?
Carter, just Carter.
I agree.
I mean, like, what else can you say? The man picks up players for fun. So yeah,
and hold them there.
You know, I mean, he's a beast. And if my Cowboys had a high enough pick, I would want him big time. But
I got him
straight up.
Yeah, the Bears could use him. The Bears.
We can work that out, Nikki.
Okay, we'll do the trade. Jerry listens to me.
We got a trade going on right here.
Yeah.
SEC Focus Podcast.
I stalk him too. And Emmitt Smith, he's moving because I stalked him so much. But yeah, I think we could work on something. Yeah.
Chris, I think you're muted right now, but I wanted to get your opinions on defensive line. Who you think's got the advantage without saying the name Jalen Carter?
I won't say that name, but I will say there is a first-round talent on the Georgia defensive line, and without question, I think Georgia's got the best defensive line in the country right now, and it'd be hard to show me otherwise.
I agree. So let's recap it real quick before we go into a few more. I got quarterback. We're giving the edge to Ohio State. Right. Running back. We're giving it to Georgia. Wide receiver. Ohio State. Tight end. Georgia. Offensive line. Georgia. Defensive line. Georgia. And the next one I want to ask you guys about, and this is the one that really stood out to me when I started looking at linebackers. A lot of NFL talent on both sides. What Georgia, they replaced 4 linebackers from last year's team, and they've still been elite. To me, and this is not the sexy pick, I think this is the spot where Georgia has the biggest advantage here over Ohio State. I think Ohio State's linebackers, while they do have NFL talent, you might see these guys playing on Sunday, it really hasn't equated to a lot of pizzazz this year. So, in my opinion, that's Georgia. But, Chris, I'll ask you first. Who do you think has the advantage there?
I'm just going to go with Georgia because that's who I know. That's who I've seen. That's who I've seen the most.
Fair. I saw them a lot, too, in the Tennessee game. They were everywhere. Like, snap the ball, there they were.
I'm not even talking about the
there's only two teams in the on the entire schedule that kept Vanderbilt from scoring a point, and Georgia was one of them.
Who was the other one, Chris?
Some team that wears a funky color of orange.
I think it was this team right here, Mike.
The Texas Rangers.
The Texas Rangers. Oh, my goodness. So, Nikki, I'll ask you, linebacker, are you going to go with Georgia as well?
Yes and no. Why I say yes is you have to also look at these Missouri games. We have to look at these games that Georgia struggled in.
That's a good point.
They weren't pretty. And it wasn't pretty as for their linebackers. It wasn't pretty for their defense. It wasn't pretty for anyone.
To be fair, Georgia did well enough defensively to keep Missouri from going up big on them as many times as they turned the ball over and gave them opportunities.
Yeah, but
and their defense actually kept them in that game.
You're the best team in the country. You should not have a what the F moment against Missouri, like of all teams.
I agree. And to what Chris is saying there, he said it during the game, Nikki, I think we all did in the chat, was that during the Missouri game, had Missouri not gone away from their identity and started trying to throw bombs, they were running all over Georgia for a period of time. So I think that's when we say stay within yourself and stick to the plan. I think that's what we mean. If you're Ohio State and you're running off chunk plays, you don't have to go for a deep bomb. You have to stay to the script against a team like Georgia because they are the best team in the country for a reason. They will beat you 10 different ways.
But were they looking ahead in the Missouri game? And will they be looking ahead this week? So we gotta see who, in my eyes, are they honestly, I see Georgia looking ahead because Ohio State has players sitting that won't play because, first round picks and all kinds of stuff. So do they think they already won this game and they're going to show up and end up having that same issue against Ohio State? But when you do it against a team like Ohio State, you don't get the same outcome. Like
And
you
that,
got,
and that's where my key of you've been there before,
Mhm.
act like it. This is their
So is
third
State.
NCAA college football playoff semifinal.
Mhm.
They've been there before. They know what can happen if they don't take care of business. And that's one of the keys for Georgia is you have to act like you've been there.
Ohio State's been there too.
Yeah, it seems like every year they're there for at least a
Yeah.
short period of time. But Mike, not to leave you out, linebackers, man, who you think's got the advantage?
I think you said the key word. Oh, you said a couple other keywords, but I don't know how to say those. But you said one word I loved was identity, and I think you saying they have this revolving door of linebackers coming in the last several years, and they don't miss a beat. That identity that they're instilling in these young men is second to nobody. I mean, it doesn't matter who you're getting. Guys are 6'4", guys are 6'5", guys are 6'2", 6'1", and they're all playing the same way. I mean, what's that quote? What's that quote? What is man? You know what? Never mind. I forgot what DB says, but DB's gonna kill me for that. Sharp body, strong minds, grit and grind all the time. That's what I was gonna say. But man, I'm canceled. But
Yeah,
my
you're
point
out.
being, I think them having that identity of this is the standard, this is what we do. And the way that they just dissect film, which I've spoken to a couple guys around the league that I know that go to Ohio State, and they really do preach to Georgia, and they do preach to guys like from Alabama. That's what they do. They live and breathe film, and I think that's one of the biggest things right now. And to Nikki's point as well about the making the mistake the first go around. You a grown ass man. As the coach of that organization, as a leader of the organization, you need to understand this is how we effed up the first time. We kind of got caught lacking a little bit, got caught sleeping. It's okay. But you have to learn from those mistakes. And that's where you'll start to see a real coach, a real team that actually overcomes those problems that they've had. If you believe, hey, it was just a random day, we'll get them next time. Like, no, you need to know, like, this is where you messed up, and this is how we're going to make sure this doesn't happen the next time. So as long as they go after those key factors with, if a 22-year-old male could tell you, then I'm pretty sure that a grown man in that university could tell you better than I can. So I'm sure they'll be all right, and they'll learn from that mistake.
Yeah, I think the difference between this year's team and last year's team, and it's growth for Kirby too as well. They had games last year. They got blown out in the Alabama game. It doesn't take a blowout now. This year, they were good enough to overcome those, capitalize on some opportunities and still win those ugly games. I think the LSU, the championship game could have been that. Colin brings up another point. Honestly, I think we play to the caliber of team we're playing sometimes. And I think that's human nature when you're talking about 18 to 23, 24-year-old guys. But I think what Kirby, his intensity is the same at all times. And I think it'll be ramped up. Obviously, there is no win, looking to next week. This is win or go home time. This is all for all the marbles. The last position matchup I want to talk about
Go ahead.
is defensive backs, DBs, if you will.
Oh.
For this one, I actually went back and forth a lot. Both teams have been prone to giving up big plays in the secondary. Both teams have 10 picks. I went with Ohio State with a slight advantage with the DBs just because I think that they will have the advantage over the Georgia receivers. That's kind of where I went with it. Both teams, I said, have 10 picks, but we saw the last thing we saw. I'm a what have you done for me lately? We saw LSU put up over 500 yards of passing against Georgia. That's the last thing we saw. So, Nikki, I'm starting with you on this one. Who do you think has the advantage on the defensive backfield?
I'm kind of split, but I will go with Ohio State. I watched them against Penn State, against Michigan, even losing, stand up and keep that game. They tried to keep it close, but they made the difference in a lot of those games this year. But also Georgia, their DBs did too. We kind of I guess it depends. Like, okay, so Colin says that they play down. That's where I have the if part. You can't play down. And in the defensive back situation, they did play down. Georgia did on quite a few games this year. Ohio State's DBs actually came out fighting every game. So I give it to Ohio State.
Chris, what do you think, DB?
I think Ohio State probably has better DBs just because of the competition they face every single day in practice. But I wanted to address the LSU game. What we saw in that game, LSU secondary kind of controlled everything up until late in the game when they brought in the gunslinger that threw it all over the field. And the game was well in hand at that point. So I think they approached that as we've done the job. We're moving on. Let's not get anybody hurt. Pull up a little bit. And I think that's what led to a lot of what LSU was able to do late in the game is they backed off. I don't think Ringo is going to back off like that against a guy like Harrison Jr. He's going to win some of those battles, and he'll probably lose a couple of them. But I think it's going to be a good matchup. But overall, I think Ohio State's better because of the competition they face every day.
Agreed. Mike, DBs, who you got?
I got equal. Can I equal?
Yeah, you can. You can.
I can equal. Like I really. Here's the way I look at it, and I didn't like Randy Jowers' comparison to the offenses because I think, like you said, what have you done for me recently? I don't care if the guy you're playing across from you hasn't walked in 10 years. Like at the end of the day, dude, like you ain't any better. Like you might look worse than he does while you're walking. Like that's for me where I think they're both equal. I think maybe there's some guys who are a little more skilled, a little more rounded. But there's also guys on the other end who are a little bit more athletic. And I think that's really what it comes down to me. It's really veterans versus athletes. I feel like Ohio State really has those athletes. They're really, I mean this respectfully because I know a few of them. They're really kind of like wide receiver DB mixes. I think they weren't really good enough for a college version of a wide receiver, especially in that class, which, you got Harrison and you got JSN, you got Williams, you got all these guys. Ain't no problem. Like, that's perfectly fine. Like, if you're a part of the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver group, it's cool if you're the fourth string, fifth string. Like, it's a deep group. So I think, that's really what I look at it for that. Whereas Georgia, I see some veterans, some battle-tested guys. Again, the identity of really just making sure these guys embody what it means to be a Georgia Bulldog. But I do think Randy laughed.
Dog.
That dog. But I do think, it kind of just cancels each other out. So I would say if you're going based off matchup, I'm going to give it to Ohio State just because I do believe that, Georgia offensively isn't as talented. But you're also facing the national champions, the defending national champions. So not national
back, like Drake said.
Yeah. So, it's really one of those things where you never know till you know. But I would say they're pretty equal at the position.
All right. So, Mike, sticking with you, give me your final score prediction and who wins it.
Don't do that. Listen.
Don't be the guy from up north that picks two Big Ten teams.
I'm going to be disrespectful. I'm going to say Ohio State wins this game 41-27.
A 2-touchdown win for the Ohio State. All right, Nikki, talk to me, baby.
I'm definitely going. I hate it. God, Georgia.
Spit them words out.
She almost threw up when she said it.
You got it, Nick.
Georgia, 38. Ohio State, 27.
I'm liking it. I could get with that.
All right, Chris, talk to us.
I'm going to go Georgia 30, Ohio State 17. And I believe that it's going to be sealed on a Kaylee Ringo interception.
Wow.
In the fourth quarter.
Talk your shit, Chris.
Wow. Okay. Well, similar to what we did in the Michigan TCU, we're split. I think that oh man, Colin, I'm so sorry, man. I think that this is setting up for Ohio State to get the upset win. I looked down and I even gave Georgia the advantages in so many of these position comparisons. But for some reason, my gut's telling me that Ohio State's got a little bit more ump to it. They got a little bit more to prove. Georgia's coming off of it. So I got Ohio State winning this thing, and I'm going to say it's going to be 34-31. It's going to be a field goal at the end. That's how I see it.
When was the last time you saw a great game end with a field goal, Randy? If you don't mind me asking.
I saw Tennessee, Alabama this year end with a field goal, baby.
Really?
You pulled it out in Baylor.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They came on with no timeouts with like 3 seconds.
It happened a year ago, but I saw a great game end in a field goal with Vanderbilt coming from behind to beat UConn to beat an ugly streak that was going on.
This is true. Nobody saw that game, Chris, but it was you and
no one saw that. Honestly, it was just Chris watching. Yeah. It was a live stream.
It was a live stream.
It wasn't even televised. It was
actually I was there, and as soon as the kick went through, a nasty thunderstorm kicked off in the middle of a firework display.
I think I wasn't happy.
Randy, he hit the field goal, and the whole arena was silent. All you heard Chris go was "Woo, woo!"
We're out of here.
About right.
We're out of here.
Yeah. So Colin says, "Never know. Hard to win it twice." My brother, all love. And Colin, that is no disrespect to Georgia. Again, I think what Kirby has done is phenomenal, and they're going to continue to be there. He is elite right now. I got to put him right now in time, not overall. He is at the top of the college football world. You look at the way that they're continuing to recruit well, the talent's coming in. I think that what he was able to do this year to get back after losing 13, 14 guys, phenomenal. I think that Ryan Day has a point to prove as well. The guy's 45-5 and has fans calling for his job. So it's to me, that's crazy. That's the world we live in.
But Georgia, the one last year with the chip on their shoulder. This
true.
Year it's Ohio.
Very true.
So speaking of Kirby Smart, did you see the video of him today?
I did.
Apparently yesterday there was a video of Nick Saban working out with his team. So today, Kirby Smart, to one-up him, goes out on the field and works out with his team. That's the craziest video I've ever seen, because he reminded me of Richard Simmons doing his push-ups.
Sweating to the oldies.
He was trying to follow in Daddy's footsteps.
Listen, Nikki, this is for you. What if Marcus Freeman, you think he works out with his boys?
I hope so.
I bet he does. I bet Mike, if Marcus Freeman looks like he could suit up right now.
Oh my gosh.
Listen, ain't nobody suiting up like my guy Dion is right now, though. That's all I know. My boy
He's
Dion
got half a foot, bro. He can't suit up.
Yeah, okay. And he could suit up. He didn't say he was.
He would look good, wouldn't
he? He would look great.
That third toe is angry enough that he could still play today.
Or how about Tio and Dez?
Dez would
that
those boys wanting to come back.
I mean this respectfully. Dez took so many hits. I think Dez would forget where he was the second he walked out the locker room.
Nah, that man hasn't missed the Cowboys game since he left.
Listen, for everybody, I want to say, Mike, thank you for joining us on SEC Focus Podcast. My brother for life. I love you. Nikki, queen of everything we do. I appreciate you joining us, giving your perspective. Chris, as always, my co-host that always keeps me sane. For the SEC Focus Podcast page, go check our Facebook page out. If you have not, join it, share it with your friends, share it with your mama. I'm going to go watch Tennessee and Clemson. I told y'all how I broke that down earlier. Go check that out if you haven't. But for SEC Jeezy and the team, we out.